the Bible of the electrogenic cell. It's not just the best book ever written on the subject, it's the only book ever written on this subject. Brought to you by supporters of Christ. Live from New York. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You know, we believe that, like New Yorkers, no matter how long it's been since we've been in New York last, or like wherever we are, we believe we turned that place into New York. Peace to the family. Peace to the family. Listen. It was a very interesting day yesterday. The feedback on Patreon was insane. I guess for all these years I have been teaching, I guess I haven't been saying the right things. I don't know what, I guess all these years that I've been teaching, I have not been saying the right things. Because clearly, it did not hit. All these years, it didn't click for people until they saw week 4, day 2. Week 4, day 2, we run through this timeline. All of a sudden, it clicks for people. It makes sense. Now, for the few, I guess, it clicked in the minds of the few, right? In the minds of the few, when I did the work surrounding Max Kleber and figured out the 100-year-old mystery, right? So for you guys that don't know, Max Kleber, I guess maybe 70 or so years ago, something to that effect, he took a look at the existing medical science, if you will, and he said that the science surrounding the body producing energy was somehow inaccurate. He said the information was inaccurate because there was about 15, 20, 25% of energy being created by the body that was not accounted for by science. He won an award. First, he said he was crazy, but then he won some awards after they couldn't debunk him and figured out he was correct. And, they just kind of moved him to the background. They first tried to ridicule him, get him out the way. That didn't work. He only got more popular. So then they gave him some awards, a few dollars, and moved him on out of the way so they could get back to business. And it just stayed that way. Nobody addressed this extra energy that the body was producing. It just stayed that way. Like the Max Kleber paradox or the Max Kleber mystery, or, it just stayed that way, right? Until we took a hard look at it. And that's where the book Melanin vs. Diabetes, book 1, that's where that book starts at, right? I had maybe 10 years or so of information based on doing 40-day fasts with a wide variety of people, from professional athletes to people with diabetes, cancer, fat people, senior citizens, teenagers, kids, white, black, Americans, Europeans, Africans, like just a wide variety of people, street people, corporate people, like pretty much every genre or category of people you could name, we had done fasts with. And so from that information, I came to some conclusions, or theories or hypotheses, if you will, that, certain anomalies were not necessarily anomalies because they were widely experienced. And if we track them, the phenomena is reproducible, right? So I kind of, like, you know what? I need to get my notebook, because I just said to myself, we need a book. We need a book. This is how I figure out what type of books that we need. My father is still guiding me from the great beyond. My father's still guiding me. He told me when I was a kid, he said, because I got my reading thing from him. I never seen another human read like him before. Never, 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 never. And we got big heads, Haitians, but our running joke was that it was all in the books. And literally, he would read, anywhere from 50 to over 100 books a month. Like, it was crazy. You know what I'm saying? It was crazy, Now, mind you, his favorite type of book was cowboy books. Like his favorite type of book was cowboy books. You could always put a smile on his face by getting him a Louis L'Amour book or something, like, he liked cowboy stuff, gangster, mob stuff. He didn't like street stuff, though. Oddly enough, he didn't like urban. Well, it wasn't really an urban literature at the time. There was only Donald Goins and Robert Beck, so they hadn't made a category or a genre for that kind of material yet. But I got my reading from him. Only thing is, what I like to read, was different. You know what I'm saying? I had a different subject matter, and I would get super stressed out when I couldn't find a book. When I couldn't find a book. And, he told me, he said, listen, if the book that you're looking for is not out there, then it means it's your job to write that book. So I have literally taken that phrase. 200 books later, I'm still like, man, we need a book on this. We need a book on that. Yeah. We need books on things.
Oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I'm supposed to do. Good, man. Good thing I have my grocery shopping list. Don't leave home without it.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Note to self. Note to self. But so yeah. I'm still, following that line of thought. You know what I'm saying? But back to live action, right? I know, I know I'm the segue, and I start talking and get, go down. I just hit the switch. But no, we took a look at, the Max Kleber problem, because the Max Kleber problem was, okay, so here's another caveat that I got to put in place, right? The other caveat is the diabetes, like being doomed by the medical institutions, by the healthcare system, like being pronounced at birth doomed to die from diabetes. Being pronounced at birth doomed to die from diabetes. That was like a driving factor in my whole health paradigm, because even as a black person, even if you don't die from complications of diabetes, technically whatever you die from is going to be related to your metabolism. That's just how they do it. They just throw that on it. It's almost like the Dave Chappelle skit. The Dave Chappelle skit when they find like dead black people in the neighborhood and they like sprinkle some crack on them. Yeah, they sprinkle some crack on them and then boom, we close the case. You know how he died. Yeah, they sprinkle a little crack on him. You know how he died. It was a drug deal going bad, right? The doctors kind of have that sprinkle a little diabetes on them. That's typically what. And so the interesting thing was, it's 2025. I'll be 50 pretty soon. Like I'm pulling up on 50. 2027, I'll be 50, right? So we're talking the 90s is when I'm, like early to mid 90s is when my ideas are formulating about certain things health wise, and just, going through all of Barnes and Nobles, going through every floor at Strands, you know what I'm saying? To the point where I started out on the first floor, went through the basement, and this is taking time. Going through the bay. If you know what Strands looked like, then Strands was a building dedicated to books. If you call it a bookstore, you don't really know Strands. It was a building dedicated to books, and different floor, like first floor is your random, beginners, kind of, you look at it like that. The basement was like the extra stash. And then as you went up in the elevator through the floors, you got to the more rare book spaces. You know what I'm saying? To the point where some of them floors up there, the books is all locked, and, like book might be $10,000, like crazy. But then my dad instructed me. He gave me the cheat code. He gave me another cheat code. He said, you know, school is two purposes. You know, most people are trained to go to college to get a job. That's why people are going to college. They're going to college to enable themselves to make money, right? But that doesn't have to be your thing. You can want the knowledge. You could want the information because I'm watching you. You hunting down books. You into this thing here with the health and the body and all that. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't into it. My father's from the hood. You know what I'm saying? Like but he could respect my drive. You know what I'm saying? He thought it was fun. You know, he thought it was funny to an extent. He was like, no, go crazy, you know. But what you can do is, because I was stressed out, I couldn't really find books anymore. Even searching like rare books. And he was like, well, you know, if you're not interested in the degree, nothing's stopping you from getting the books. You can just start going down to the college, you know, college campuses. John Jay right there, this one right there. Go down to the campuses and just go to the bookstore. Some of them will have used bookstores where you can get the college books. The book brand new might be $300-400, but you can get it for $50, $75. You can get, you know, used college books. And so I had a well-rounded idea from going through years and years and years and years of just reading and searching through books. You know, I had a good idea of what Max Kleber, in his day and age, I had a good idea of what he went through, right? So all this reading and all this studying is long before I ever start a 40-day fruit fast, right? This is all long before. This is the miseducation of Sonny Carson. No, this is just my, you know, this is my growth period, right? At the time, it's a hobby for me. You know, when I'm starting to go through these stages, I'm in my teenage years. Amber hadn't been hit by a car, like none of those situations that led me to this space. None of the large life-changing moments, at least, like Amber getting hit by a car, those situations hadn't happened yet, right? Now, looking back on it, obviously, I was still being prepared, right? Because if these things don't happen, where I'm consuming, you know, hundreds, maybe thousands of books and spending years entrenched in the study, when these situations happen, I'm probably not prepared. I probably don't have cabins of plants and liquids and all kinds of things in my apartment with the knowledge to mix them properly, to make something to help my daughter's spine and neck. And, you know, like I'm there's no way I'm prepared for that situation. Even if I'm prepared, there's no way I'm confident when that situation happens if I don't go through, you know, 15 years, 10 years worth of, you know, voracious studying, right? So all I said to say, Max Kleber, his story is the same, but just, you know, because he had went through all of the information available to him in his time period. And he's like, yeah, something's not adding up. Now, me, I get the advantage, right? I could critique Max Kleber, fill in the blanks, you know what I'm saying? Just like I could, you know, quote unquote, violate Dr. Sebi, right? Even though it's not really in the science world, that's not what it is. You're just finding the mistakes in your hero so you know how to add on to the legacy, right? But for the internet world that we live in now, you know, post Puffy, anytime you don't like something, you're a hater, right? So I get it. You know what I'm saying? I understand both sides, right? But it allows you to advance when you're standing on the shoulders of somebody who's already laid the groundwork. So Max Kleber already laid the groundwork that the idea of food, health, and metabolism and how the body produces energy from food was incorrect. And not only did he lay the groundwork in terms of making a theory or idea, but the very institutions that created those curriculums said, hey, us, sensei, you are correct. But neither us nor you are smart enough to figure out where we are incorrect at. Like the institutions eventually told Max, yeah, you got it. You're correct. We can't argue with you. You're correct. But you don't have a solution. We don't have a solution. There's no. So I can come along 60 years later and go, hey, how about this pigment thing? Yeah, I don't think, you guys, you didn't factor in this pigment thing. So, and you couldn't have factored in the electron transport chain, right? So because you couldn't factor in the electron transport chain and you couldn't factor in pigment, bam, doctor with the gold teeth. Here I am. Yeah, I got plenty of time on my hands. Let me see those nasty old books there. Yeah. You guys go back to work, paying for your Ferrari and your kids at Harvard. Yeah. Me and my little YouTube family. No. They got my back. My YouTube family, they got me. They're going to hit the website and get some books, and they're going to join the Patreon. They're going to hold me down while I go through. I'm going to do all this stuff that most people would consider torture. Like most people, if they had to go through this type of material, blood would come out of their eyeballs and blood would come out of their ears, and they would just die from like abject torture, right? But I got you. I'm going to do it because I think it's funny. And I enjoy it. So yeah, you help me keep the lights on. I'm going to go ahead and do this for us all, right? So I'm like, yeah, boom. I'm looking at the tests Max Kleber put together. All these tests is with like animals and white folks. Even the test with white folks is like done indoors. And I'm like, They didn't even accidentally include pigment. Like they didn't even accidentally include, because sometimes you could look back at the study and go, even if somebody's not aware of something, it can still be a factor. You don't have to be aware of something to include it in a way. You know what I'm saying? Like it won't be in your written up stuff or whatever, but if you look at the experiment, it'll be part of like had they done the experiments outside, his results would have had to include, sunlight exposure, nitric oxide, vitamin D, cholesterol turnover, and things that are just missing, right? So because Max Kleber figures this out, but he can't factor in electricity. He can't factor in electricity, right? Because they got Galvani with the frog legs and all that, but they don't really know what they're doing, right? So they can't factor in electricity, and there's no such factoring in of pigment. So boom, I pop out. Hey, yeah, here's this problem, here's that problem, and bam, there's a third type of tissue. Yeah, There's the non-energy producing tissue. There's the tissue that sucks up a lot of energy. And then there's another type of tissue. Yeah. As per the electron transport chain, there's no fire in the body. There's no burning fat. There's no burning sugar. It's electricity. Yeah, that's number one. Number two, we have a whole set of tissue is in our body that's designed around this electricity concept. Because electrons are the most important thing in the body, we have tissue designed by the big homie, the most high, most talented, most beautiful, right? Our creator. Yeah, we have tissue designed for electricity, or we have tissue designed for redox, if you're more comfortable with that. But redox is just electricity in scientific terms, right? You're moving around protons and moving around electrons. So electricity, protonicity. I keep telling y'all, protonicity is going to be a larger and larger part of the conversation. Right now, the whole conversation is electricity, and we got to rear naked choke these folks. We got to put these folks in the rear naked choke just to get them to accept electricity. So protonicity, it's like being the second artist on a new label. It's like, yo, you dope, but we got to put all our resources into getting this guy popping first, and then you coming out right after. So right now, we got to promote these electricity albums. Right? But so anyway, there's a whole nother type of tissue dedicated to photons, electrons, and protons. Like there's a whole different opsons, bunch of different opsons, bunches of different melanins and globins, and there's a whole thing involving this light, electricity, and magnetism phenomena, right? And so that ties in with diabetes, right? That ties in with diabetes for me. If it didn't, I probably wouldn't have went that hard. Pause. But that ties in with diabetes for me because diabetes is an energy metabolism disease. It's an energy metabolism disease, right? Now, if you want to get, if you want to really think outside the box, you can go energy production disease, right? However you want to look at it. But it's a problem in what our ancestors would call the spirit, right? Today, science word for the thing that you can't see or touch, but it controls everything is energy. Yesterday, our ancestors used the word spirit. There's no difference between those two words. The only difference is those two words, right? Stuff you can't see and touch, but controls all matter. Yeah. Spirit, energy, same thing, right? So for me, it was paramount to get to the root of this, right? And then even the relationship of diabetes to obesity. Obesity is like a twin, like a fraternal twin of diabetes, right? Diabetes is a problem of metabolizing energy or producing energy, and obesity is a disease of storing energy and not being able to retrieve that energy, right? So all of these are energy problems. These are not structural problems, right? The structural damage comes from the bleed of the energy system into the physical system. And when the physical system cannot access and utilize energy, you get wear and tear and things start to break down. And then when you get physical structures, bones, tendons, ligaments, you get mobility issues, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, as glands and organs and things like that break down. Now you start to get, congestive heart failure, kidney disease, blah, 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 dementia. And now you got physical problems, or if a fluid, right? If the fluid systems start to get crazy, right? Now you got cardiovascular disease. If something's going on with the blood flow, or you got strokes, right? If the lymphatic system gets crazy, you got autoimmune disease, right? Autoimmune disease, cancer, right? Yeah, because cancer really can't grow into a problem without the lymphatic system collapsing. Pretty much. Like, and that's textbook. That the way I'm wording it might not be textbook, but that's textbook. The textbooks were written in coded language to keep the John Q. public out of the understanding, right? Because it's a money business, right? But that's the reality. That's why they tell you, metastasis is the main danger you got to worry about with cancer. Well, the main vehicle for metastasis is the lymph fluids, right? That's how cancers travel all over the body mostly, right? So, but on the flip side, what John Q. public may not know is that the average person develops cancer cells all the time. Like we might be developing cancer cells while we're having this discussion. While you watching, while I'm talking, we might be developing 1 or 2 cancer cells in our body somewhere. Should that bad boy happen to step out into the lymphatic system, not only is our lymphatic system going to dismantle it, but it's going to send out the team to inspect where he came from to make sure ain't nobody else over there, right? So it's not to the lymphatic system collapse that the lymphatic system becomes a safe roadway or travel way for bacteria, virus, cancer cells, and all kinds of bad guys, right? So this is how the energy system collapsing, right? Because people don't die from diabetes, they die from complications. This is how the energy system collapsing leads to a whole bunch of other diseases, right? So figuring out this energy thing with Max Kleber wasn't necessarily just, like people playing Sudoku or solitaire on their cell phone. Like, I got some time to kill. Let me just, let me play, solitaire on my cell phone. Like this, it wasn't that. Like we was tackling world, like life ending, we was going crazy with it. You know what I'm saying? So in the process, we're literally making discoveries that, game changing, right? And then I realized the electricity never was factored into this stuff, never factored into this stuff. Electricity is not factored into stuff. The tissue surrounding electricity, all of your pigments are not factored in either, right? The tissue has a whole different set of, it has a whole nother regulatory system, right? So now I start to look upstream and I say, oh, wow. So these things, so now we got melanin stimulating hormone, melanin concentrating hormone. We got, melanocortin receptors. We got microRNA, like that's a whole nother part of the system. If y'all have the yellow book, right? The gold book is just gold, right? It just has a single rectangle up in the corner, right? Kind of like the king's chamber, at least in my mind, right? The king's chamber is empty, just a rectangle in there, oblong square, right? But we kind of get into the microRNA piece in the gold book, right? So if you don't have the gold book, go to Amazon, get the gold book, add it to your cart, check out, right? But so a lot of stuff we kind of unpack, we unpack a lot of stuff, right? We unpack a lot of stuff, and I'm just giving you kind of the walkthrough of how all this stuff was happening. But again, the reason why I'm having this conversation is because I'm saying clearly 20 years of talking, people wasn't getting it, I guess, until the other Saturday when we go through this little timeline, right? And I'm like, maybe y'all don't get it, but medical school started 100 years before they knew what a calorie was. 100 years before they knew what a calorie was, they had medical school. So how is it possible for the human body to function? How can you know how the body works if you don't know what a calorie is? You don't have a basic concept of a calorie, right? How can you have medical school before you have the discovery of vitamins? You don't know what nutrients are. So how can you have an understanding of how to keep a body healthy if you don't know what food is? You don't know what calories are, and you don't know what nutrients are. Nutrients and calories makes up food. That's science in a nutshell. Food consists of calories and nutrients. So if you don't understand food, how you understand the body, right? You don't understand food, how you understand the body. And if you don't learn about the electron transport chain and the Krebs cycle till almost 200 years after you invent medical school, how did you think the cells worked? Right? So there's a lot of things that we take for granted that we believe should be known, that we believe should be taught. But again, commercial interests, right? Commercial interests prevent some things, right? And that's what you got to understand to let big pharma off the hook. Because I think some people they've complained, they've voiced their opinions over the years. They're like, I got soft on big pharma, because I don't attack the doctors in the hospitals like you would, like is the standard protocol in the holistic naturopathic space, right? And I don't really bang on, big pharma like the standard practice. The reason being is because I reserve my vitriol for the education system. I don't think, big pharma has got, they got some bodies, or they got some, they got some dirt up under they, they have issues. But the primary issues are not with big pharma. The primary issues are with Western academia and to a greater extent, the church, because the church set these things in play. The church set these things in play. And I know there are some people, they have a different idea of church when I say church. So I want to be specific so that what I'm saying is not confused, right? I'm not talking about the local church. I'm not talking about the Catholics, the Baptists. I'm not talking about, Reverend, I just came home from prison for 10 years and I read the Bible 3,000 times. So now I'm not talking about churches have their issues. Some of them much worse than others, but churches have their issues because the people that make up a church are human. So the same issues you find in the supermarket, you find in the church, right? You don't think that some of them people working in the supermarket done been convicted of all kinds of wild yeah, and they handling your food and you don't know what they was touching before they was touching your produce, right? So, people at the banks, the firemen, the wherever humans are, you got a wide variety of humans. You got some amazing folks, you got scum of the earth, that's just what it is, right? When I say the church, I'm referring in this sense strictly to, the early church. I'm talking specifically about like maybe the first, 1,000 years of the Greco-Roman inception, maybe even post Council of Nicaea, from that era. Maybe we can even, if we want to throw a date on it, there's a few dates we could throw on it. You know what I'm saying? We can throw the change after Alexander the Great, right? We can put that as a window. The Ptolemies era. We can go Ptolemies era, right? That's a possible date, right? We can go written manuscript, first written manuscript of the Bible by the Kemetic priests from the Elephantine Island, right? We can go Council of Nicaea. You know what I'm saying? We can go Council of Nicaea. And then from that time period, or any one of those dates, we can go from that time up into like 1291, I believe it is, right? Late 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, somewhere in that window, where the church gives the license to start educating to an actual university, to a school. Because up until that point, the church is holding the reins. And then the church sanctions the first university, I believe, in Paris. The church, the Vatican, boom, Paris, right? And then from there, you start, right, the education process. But the education process had to, because the license to educate didn't come from government. The license to educate came from the church. So you had to be in line with a baseline of church ideology. There's a baseline. You could do your own thing, but only within these parameters. And certain things you can't go outside these bounds. This is what this is, right? So that's the whole reason why you even have the culture of masonry begin to grow from that period, right? Because from the time that Alexander the Great took over or was handed the keys to Kemet, and then they converted Kemet to Egypt, right? Even before then, masonry had gone cold, right? Masonry had gone cold. After Akhenaten, masonry goes cold. Akhenaten took masonry to its height, right? Or maybe people don't want to give Akhenaten that credit, right? Because you have the pyramid builders, which obviously took it to its height in terms of complexity, demonstrating engineering and ingenuity, mathematics and geometry and astronomy. But Akhenaten took it to another type of height in terms of our idea, like of small bricks. Akhenaten created that. Small bricks to quickly build projects. Remember, they was building pyramids like multi-generational. Like they would start and then somebody else, like they would, it took a long time to build pyramids, decades into, like, so Akhenaten created this thing where you could move and use small bricks to build places up, a lot faster, going from decades to weeks. But after that, it kind of goes into collapse. It goes into collapse until France raids Kemet and all of that stuff. And then after France raids Kemet, they all of a sudden have these mathematical discoveries and discoveries of how to mix concrete and all this other kind of stuff. But it's in that period from the 11th century to like the 13th century that there's a huge Masonic revival. And that's where the Templar story gets kind of mixed in with a whole bunch of different variations. But the reason why the Masonic story explodes in that window is because that's when the church is trying to create like commercial schooling, right? So that they can teach people without people having to like become church members, right? Because up to that point, in order to learn church ideology, which was the tool of conquest in that time period, that's how they conquered you. They got you to accept their form of understanding the creator, right? Which gave them power over the world. That's the key caveat. It's not about the creator. It's about the creator works through Jesus. And Jesus appointed me. So yeah, there's God, there's Jesus, and then there's me. Like that's the whole concept of, the early church, even, contemporary, depending on who that's how conquest came in. That's how colonization became a part of the church. It's God, it's Jesus, then there's me. I'm the Pope, right? And I have my minions and my government and blah, 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 blah. We stand outside and above any sort of local kingship, emperor, dictate, whatever you got going on. We work on behalf of the creator. So we above that program. And so they start to set up this outsourcing kind of thing where anybody could be educated, kind of like McDonald's owning Burger King, or like, Burger King owning, like just being the A side, but also owning the B side, like how Don King have two fighters that he manages fighting once against one another. Like, what I'm saying? I'm winning regardless type of vibe. So that's why on the degrees that you would get from these universities, it would have all religious, symbology and wording and everything Latin and, just all of these different things that are church based because the education's church based, right? So in order to learn anything about nature, you had to do this in secret. You had to do it in secret. So the Masons were forming what would later on be called the Invisible College, right? So the Invisible College was Masonry. The Invisible College was teaching the trivium and the quadrivium as passed down to Greece, then, strong armed by Rome, but from Kemet, right? So they were teaching the trivium and quadrivium, which after you got your bearings, right? Your bearings are logic, grammar, rhetoric, like read, write, arithmetic, reading and counting and being able to articulate with, then you moved on to the higher, you moved on to geometry, astronomy, music, things like that. Well, there's a space where you can't really learn astronomy, right? You can't learn astronomy and the more complex geometry without having spiritual conversations or energy. You do what you want to, however you want to. If you want to hide the intelligence, then you might say energy, right? Because the only real nuanced difference between spirit and energy, because they're talking about the same stuff, is that energy is contextually dead, where contextually spirit is energy that's conscious to a greater or lesser extent. This is intelligent energy, right? So it's not until the 1940s that science proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that energy based on geometry exhibits its own intelligence, right? And so at that point, that's the hidden change that happens where scientists are no longer like, I pledge allegiance to the atheist flag of the atheists of the universe. Like up until that moment, you were religious or you were a scientist. You couldn't be religious and be a scientist, at least not outwardly. You had to like keep that in the closet. Like when the gay people started taking over the world, I came up with a phrase based on all of this. You know what I'm saying? I was like, okay, the homosexuals have come out of the closet. Now it's time for the intellectuals to come out of the closet, right? Because you always had to hide, especially being in the hood. You know what I'm saying? Coming out of the neighborhood, being intelligent was not cool. You know what I'm saying? I had the luck of having a big family, wow family, even later when I got adopted, even more wild cowboys surrounded me. Plus, I know how to fight. You know what I'm saying? So I never really had to hide my intelligence like that. You know what I'm saying? I was reading books outside and, if you got jokes, the joke's going to be limited unless we're going to have to figure it out the old-fashioned way, the cowboy way. You know what I'm saying? We got to figure this thing out. And that didn't go well for other people often. You know what I'm saying? Usually, it went my way, right? So you didn't want to get embarrassed by the nerd. You know what I'm saying? The guy reading the books, you want to just leave him alone. You know what I'm saying? But that wasn't the culture. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't the culture. Reading wasn't a cool thing till very recently. Reading's still not that cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, I had a small window where reading was cool, and now it's not cool again because you want to listen to books and blah, blah. It's back being cool to be stupid again. Like it was a hot minute. And the powers that be like snatched that immediately. Like, no. We will not have self-education going on. We have to stop that. Yeah, we have to stop that. Yeah, we're doing great with dementia and Alzheimer's. We have to keep that going. We cannot get people to start working out there. Look how these people are working out in the gym and in the parks and calisthenics and weights. And we cannot have people that aggressive on building their minds. We will never be able to control these people. But yeah, it's not till the 1940s that in a laboratory, clinical, reproducible, duplicatable setting, that energy starts to demonstrate intelligence, right? And that's based on geometry, right? So when that happens, that's the second time that science got backslapped across the mouth. You know what I'm saying? Backslap, like powder me. Powder me. Put some powder. The pimp slap with the baby powder. Pow. Right across the lips. Like, you know what I'm saying? The first time was spooky action at a distance, but most people, they didn't know Einstein well enough to understand what spooky action at a distance meant. Einstein was super religious. He spent the time. He had a window when he was a young man, super religious. That stayed with him forever, right? That doesn't come out of you. Even if you develop some new ideas, you still have these core concepts. So when he realized that science was going in a direction to prove God's existence, that was spooky action at a distance, right? I believe once folks figured out what spooky action, that had to change quickly, right? So the phrase kind of got, let's get rid of that phrase. We'll replace spooky action at a distance with quantum entanglement, right? Yeah, quantum entanglement's a better term, right? So boom, that's the first slap for atheist scientists. The second slap is when they figure out that structure, right? And structure is something imposed on energy by shape, geometry. So shape, geometry imposes structure. Once you impose a structure, you now have sequence. And in those situations, subatomic particles, plasma, and these things that, they demonstrate intelligence. You know what I'm saying? Like in a wide variety of tests. So at that point, things got weird. And from then going forward to today, like the Drake album, you know what I'm saying? Nothing was ever the same again. Nothing was ever the same again, right? Because a few years later, 1961, they finalized the physical or the rough draft of the electron transport chain. And the reason why I say they finalized the rough draft, because they just figuring out quantum tunneling right now. They still figuring out quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is not even in textbooks yet. And quantum tunneling is how electrons move from cytochrome 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that's what's happening, quantum tunneling, right? So that's still hot off the presses. Extra, read all about it. Quantum tunneling in the mitochondria. Like, that's not even in textbooks yet. Kids in junior highs and high school still ain't learning, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's still hot off the presses. So if we're still learning how the basis of the cell works in 2025, right? How did we have medical school in 1735? What were they teaching? They didn't know how cells work. They didn't know how cells worked. Think about this. Your heart, right? The most important thing to keeping your heart going is cardiac melanocytes. Cardiac melanocytes was discovered 15 years ago. Now, mind you, of course, we had Richard King and, we had all kinds of, we can go all the way back to Imhotep if we want to, the legend of Wuxia, where the throne of Wuxia is the heart, right? Isis, Auset, the heart, right? The perfect black's throne is the heart. So we can go back to Kemet for an understanding of this black stuff in the heart, you know what I'm saying? But typically, Greco-Roman world, having a black heart was turned into evil. The fact, right? The villain had a black heart, right? It's only 15 years that modern science, Western academia, recognizes that cardiac melanocytes are not only an actual distinct cell population inside the heart, but this is the most important cell population in the heart. Without this cell population in the heart, everybody would be dead a long time ago, because this is the cell population responsible for maintaining the electrical activity in the heart. So technically, 15 years ago, we just figured out how the heart works. Roughly, right? Because there's still a lot to learn. But 15 years ago, we just figured out what makes the heart go. We had cardiology. We had cardiology school for 100 years already. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just discovered the glymphatic system 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. Yeah, the glymphatic system is super new. Maybe 2019, 2020, whatever. Last decade. We had neurology schools for over 100 years. So this system is upside down. That's why we the sickest people. Because when we make these discoveries, we do not add these discoveries to the existing database, which is what common sense would tell you to do. Yeah, oh, we discovered calories right here, 1842, bet. So going from 1843 on, medical school supposed to include calories. No, sir. When we discover vitamins and minerals, 1910, medical school supposed to include vitamins and nutrition. 1911 going forward, they supposed to revolutionize medical. No. They just create separate businesses. That's why there's a vitamin and mineral and supplement market. That's why it exists, because medical school stuck with medicine. Even when the discoveries came out 100 years, 150 years later about nutrition. It was like, all right, well, y'all deal with that nutrition thing. We good. We got our medicine. We're going to keep rolling with the medicine thing. You know what I'm saying? And they kept playing with medicine. You know what I'm saying? So somebody's got to develop the electric thing. Yeah. Yeah. Me and you. Yeah, me and you. We got to do it. Right? Me and you. We got to do it. That's why I said y'all need to start writing y'all books. My man Bayard hit me up. I'm waiting for the rough draft coming from Bayard. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I'm waiting for y'all to start writing these books with me. Yeah, I need y'all to get going, because it's all us. It's all us. And don't think the world's not interested, because Department of Defense put, like, I forgot how much millions it was, some old crazy number, into studying magnetism in cells. Magnetism in cells. We have a couple of books. If you don't have them, you might want to go get those. Right? Kinetic Naturopathy, Anatomy of the Mind, book 1 and book 2. We have 2 books, Anatomy of the Mind, book 1 and book 2, on magnetism in the body, right? And the whole thing behind, the big push in the research, and just the fact that the Department of Defense pushed it lets you know where it's considered, A, the level of importance, but B, how it's viewed, right? Because cutting edge technology is always military first. After military get it, play with it, do whatever they want to do with it, and it get old, then they kick it out to the public. So the fact that we now have a level of transparency to see what's going on ahead of time, like, oh, where the money goes, that's where they're getting ready to start the development. And so the fact that they went there is no coincidence that you hear, alien stuff on TV. Oh, the Congress is talking about aliens. That's baloney, right? That's all baloney, right? But what they are getting ready to do is start developing certain things to augment your body, in another way. And that is the mind, right? So that's why Elon is at the forefront of the space race and also making synthetic neurons. Duh, 2 + 2 is 4. He's in the spaceship game, right? But he's also in the fake neurons game. Why? Because that's one thing. That's one thing, right? That's why we have the radio anatomy. We were talking about the horns and the antennas and the radars and that's one thing, right? That's all one thing. That's one space, right? Exploration of the human mind, right? It's just going beyond bounds that, safe exploration and moral lines have to be crossed. So for certain things to be done, it's easier to say that they're looking for little green people in outer space than to tell you exactly what's going on, right? But probing biological magnetism, you're probing the mind, and you're probing the mind of cells, and you're probing the space. Like, this is the space that's never been, you've never been, but we can find that space and document that space the natural way, which is following the light. You know what I'm saying? Follow electricity. Electricity is going to lead us to the magnetism, right? Magnetism and electricity will lead us to the light. And we'll figure out creating new information, storing information, transmitting and sharing that information, right? All of that, right? In the electric, magnetic, and then electromagnetic space. So, yeah, hopefully that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? That's the layup line. That's today's layup line, right? That's today's warm up. And then we can get, that was a long warm up. Yeah, that was an hour worth of that. Now that is a college lecture. Man. Listen, melanin is anabolic arrives today. That's what I'm talking about. Pay I tend to be talking that talk. Pay I tend to be talking that talk. right? Pay attention. Be trying to tell y'all how to pay attention, right? Pay attention, right? Let us all right, so let's go here for a second. Kind of want to get started with this so we can get to work. Right, so we can get to work. Let's go over to Amazon. All right, when you go over to Amazon, right, you see that right there? With the triangle and the pitchfork and the letter M. The triangle, the pitchfork, and the letter M. Well, that triangle's not called a triangle, the pitchfork's not a pitchfork, and the letter M's not a letter M. Right? So let's take a deeper look into what that is and why it is on the cover of the book. Right? And you see right here, the triangle, the pitchfork, the letter M. Right? And I didn't do anything crazy to get this to pop up. I just copy and paste the triangle, the pitchfork, and the M. Google converted it into this weird zeta, this weird Z or number 5 looking symbol here, right? But the first hit, right, mitochondria membrane potential. You go down a little bit more, you see Science Direct has an article, same symbol. Who else? You see BioRx, genetically encoded tool for manipulation of, then you see our little symbols here, once again, right? Then you see top of the line science journals, right? Having a discussion, Springer leak, right? All right. So let's just go to the top here and see what we have. All right. Mitochondrial membrane potential. The mitochondrial membrane potential, right? And then it has our symbol here in parentheses. So that's telling you right there, if you couldn't take it from me, what that is. Right? So that symbol on the cover of the book is mitochondria membrane potential, right? And you see right on top of it, I have the formula for how the mitochondria membrane produces water, right? Because they go together, right? These things go together. All right. So let's get back over here. Let's see what we got. Let's see what we got. Week 4, day 3. The mitochondrial membrane potential generated by proton pumps, right? And now we have cytochrome 1, 3, and 4, or complexes 1, 3, and 4, identified as proton pumps, right? So remember what I was saying. Remember what I was saying about hydrogen, right? Because hydrogen is the mechanism. And I don't mean the source. I actually mean the mechanism. Man, I need that little spray thingy, right? Where's my little spray thingy? My children be violating me. Is this my spray thingy? Yeah, see, look at this. I got the spray thingy. This one did. They done broke the top off the spray thingy. Okay, here goes another one. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. Here we go. All right, yeah. It's a little bit. That's a little better. Okay, now that's a lot better. That's a lot better. All right, now we cook it. Now we got a whiteboard. All right, now we got a whiteboard. So remember when I was saying with the hydrogen thing, right? Hydrogen is different than all other atoms because it's just a proton and an electron. That's it. There's no neutron, which means there's not really a nucleus. Like people will say to you in the scientific language, this is where they exaggerate just to make a program make sense. Kind of lie. It's really a lie. It's really a lie, but it's like a little white lie or an exaggeration, but it's definitely not the truth type of thing. They go, the hydrogen nucleus only contains a proton. The nucleus is an imaginary space, first of all. It's not a real space. It's a hypothetical space that's just created around the concept that in the middle of an atom, you have protons and neutrons. So that space where the protons and neutrons are is considered the nucleus, right? But it's not like in your mind, you picture protons and then neutrons and then like a bubble. So like it's not. So the fact that there's no neutrons, it just means it's just electrons and protons. And the attraction of one to another is where the magic is, right? That's what runs this universe. That's the beauty of what Kemet was teaching with duality, right? That's where the binary codes and the binary math and everything came from, was the universe presents itself in two, right? It presents itself in two opposites that sometimes attract and sometimes repel. And between the attraction and repulsion, you can create an infinite amount of different variations of the same thing. An infinite amount of variations of the same thing based on quantity and quality, right? So it's this attraction between protons and electrons that powers the cytochromes or the complexes. Because every time an electron pops up, protons get pumped through. So an electron appears, boop, and then a proton tries to catch it and just misses it. Just misses it. So one electron goes to the cytochrome is able to pump one proton through. The more electrons you pump through this way, the more protons you pump through this way. The more protons you get into this matrix, the more ATP you can recycle. So the amount of electrons determines the amount of protons. The amount of protons determines the amount of ATP that gets recycled. The amount of ATP gets recycled determines the energy that your body has, whether the cells, tissues, organs, glands, bones, everything, whether it can all work or not, right? Because there is a minimum requirement for energy production. Then there's a maximum amount, and then there's too much, right? There's a such thing as too much. Too much starts to damage the tissues from overuse, right? That's where in the fitness universe, you have conversations about overworking out and blah, 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 right? Too much energy going through the body. Or if you have children and you feed them too much sugar, right? The way your body is designed to get rid of sugar is metabolizing it. Well, if you put a lot of sugar, then they got to do a lot of metabolizing. So that means they're going to be moving around, even if they can't control themselves. And if they don't have an organized system of movement, like a martial art or basketball or volleyball or something to do to channel that movement, it's going to just be running around the house or grabbing their sister's hair or doing something stupid. But the thing they won't be able to stop doing is moving because they got too much carbohydrates, right? They got too much carbohydrates. So this is why I say this relationship of hydrogen is the mechanism, right? Even though your textbooks might tell you, well, it's the electron attracting the proton across the across the membrane from one matrix or from the inner matrix to the outer matrix. It's the attraction, right? It's the fact that hydrogen is made of electron and proton together. So when you split them up, now they spend their life trying to get back together. They belong together. Right? That's why you really shouldn't have distilled water, right? Because when you strip the minerals from water, it's going to be looking to put them back, and it'll start grabbing stuff from your body. Anyway, all right. All right, so the mitochondrial membrane potential generated by proton pumps is an essential component in the process of energy storage during oxidative phosphorylation. Together with the proton gradient, the mitochondrial membrane potential forms the transmembrane potential of hydrogen ions, which is harnessed to make ATP. Right? So this symbol here, delta and pH, right? Delta and pH is the symbol for the proton gradient, right? And when you put these two together, the proton gradient and the membrane potential, you have the potential of hydrogen ions, which is harnessed to make ATP. The level of your mitochondrial membrane potential and your proton gradient in the cell are kept relatively stable although there are limited fluctuations of both these factors that can occur, reflecting normal physiological activity. However, sustained changes in both factors may be deleterious. 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 Very interesting. We're going to replace deleterious with disease forming. We're going to replace deleterious with the normal activity of what we see in diabetics. We're going to replace deleterious with the normal activity we see in people with metabolic disease, right? A long-lasting drop or rise of mitochondrial membrane potential versus normal levels may induce unwanted loss of cell viability and may be a cause of various pathologies. Okay, so here they go. They bringing it back around. This is the use of specialized vocabulary to turn off the general masses from studying this material on their own. Similar to what the church, but the church has the problem that John Q. Public can read the Bible. So the church has to put the message out there that you should not read the Bible because you don't know how to understand it yourself. You need me to interpret it for you. Whereas the scientific journals stand on the shoulders of Western academia, who stands on the shoulders of the church, and that same philosophy is there, but instead they just use vocabulary to frustrate and obfuscate, to make you allergic to this type of study on your own, right? But may be a cause of various pathologies. Among other factors, mitochondrial membrane potential plays a key role in mitochondrial homeostasis through selective elimination of dysfunctional mitochondria, right? So I don't know, I guess at some point maybe they'll get into, oh yeah, here it goes right here. Mitophagy, right? So mitophagy is a classification of autophagy, just specifically referring to mitochondria. So know that when you put your body in the space of autophagy, mitophagy is happening also, right? Mitophagy is happening also, and not just mitophagy. All of the enzymes, molecular machines, organelles, spent proteins, anything made out of amino acids that needs to be repaired or broken down and rebuilt comes under the broad umbrella of autophagy. It's just mitochondria is its own separate organism. So even though the stimulation pathway is the same, mitochondria handles its own business. It does its own killing, its own rebuilding, its own, right? So a large part of mitophagy is built into the framework of mitochondrial biogenesis, right? Which is how mitochondria divide to multiply, right? Or in order to sometimes repair, multiple mitochondria will come together and make one larger one, right? Some younger, newer ones may come together to make a bigger one, right? So it looks nasty under a microscope, like it looks creepy. It looks creepy if you watch it, mitochondria dividing into other little wormy looking things, or a couple of them coming together. It looks like a crazy magic, like a magic show almost, because two becomes one, you know what I'm saying? Or three becomes one. It gets crazy. But that's where we're going here, right? All right, introduction. The mitochondrial membrane potential results from redox transformations associated with the activity of the Krebs cycle and serves as an intermediate form of energy storage, which is used by ATP synthase to make ATP. All right. Again, don't be intimidated by the wording. We already went through all of what you need to know about this, not only in all these years on YouTube, but definitely in the first 3 weeks, right? We've already discussed the Krebs cycle. We've already discussed redox, right? We've already discussed redox. We have a nice little book. If you don't have it, it might help, right? If you don't have it, it might help. I mean, we have a bunch of books, but electrochemistry, right? The Dr. Sebi versus Dr. Inky book, right? Acid-base reactions, right? I think it's a good book, a good explainer. I think it's a very good explainer for diabetes, A1C, glycation, etc. But definitely redox. Yeah, I think it definitely touches on redox and bioelectricity and just some key concepts that you need to build upon. Right. Page 1 opens with oxidation states. Right. Gaining oxygen and losing hydrogen. Right. Page 1, gaining oxygen and losing hydrogen. Right. So anyway, if you don't have the Dr. Sebi versus Dr. Inky book, you might want to add that to your cart. That's electrochemistry. Right. In the short term, redox is reduction, oxidation. Right? So yes, there's a space where oxidation means to add oxygen, right? But there's also a space where it's about removing electrons, right? Removing electrons. So there's nuanced variation in the context of how that term is used sometimes. Meaning it could mean something different depending on how it's used, right? But redox is a term that became important. It became important to have a term for reduction and oxidation post 1961. Once they start figuring out this concept, right? There's no fire. There's no burning calories. There's no burning. There's no fire. It's electrons and protons. It's electricity, right? It's electricity, right? So now we need terms for this that separate us from an electrician, right? Because electricians use terms like electricity, so we need our own terms, right? So redox is kind of that terminology that categorizes, classifies, quantifies, you know, the movement of electrons and protons and potentials and blah, blah, blah. Right? Don't y'all like my blah, blah, blah game? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, blah, 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 or the dash, or the 3 dots. Like, you be killing us with them 3 dots, ain't you? Yeah, that's good. You got to build your mind up. So the 3 dots or the dash, you know, that you got to think now, figure it out. That's, you know, now I done gave you this part. Now what you got? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So anyway, the mitochondrial membrane potential results from redox transformations associated with the activity of the Krebs cycle, right? So that's breaking down carbohydrates and fatty acids, right? And serves as an intermediate form of energy storage, which is used by ATP synthase. ATP synthase is another term for cytochrome 5 or complex 5, or ATPase, right? It's the turbine that spins the wheel, right? The 12 proton wheel. That's what they're talking about when they say ATP synthase, right? This is the 12 proton unit here with the 3 branches that recycles the ATP. These transformations generate not only an electrical potential, but also a proton gradient. And together they form the transmembrane potential of hydrogen ions. Okay. So typically, right, if you go back to the basics, right, and this is just like mental Rolodex kind of stuff. But you go back to the basics. Yo, my calf muscle is tight. I understand. Do some stretching. Yeah, my calf muscle is tight. I've been working though. I've been working. Yeah. Fat people are not allowed to do a class on teaching about what fat is. Ah! Yeah, yo, children are wild. Because children will just look right at you and tell you the thing that you be ready to fight somebody else for saying. But you just got to accept it if your children say it to you. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I've been working. You know, I've been trying to get some days 20,000, 30,000 steps in, you know. Push it to the limit. Limit. I've been pushing it. Some days running, playing basketball now. You know, I've been pushing. But thank God, no injuries yet. So I'm trying to continue to push it, but at the same time, make sure that my antioxidant level and hydration level just stays through the roof, no matter how many times I got to go to the bathroom. Yeah. Because you're going to have to go to the bathroom. That's the thing, right? Think about that. You got to stay extra hydrated to move the nutrients through the body and all that, right? So you got to stay extra hydrated. But then think about what we're saying. When we have the conversation and we talk about metabolizing carbohydrates and fats, speeds up your metabolism. I mean, exercise speeds up your metabolism. Let me put this together the right way. Exercise speeds up your metabolism. You need more exercise to get into better shape, right? So that means you need to speed up your metabolism, especially if you want to lose some fat, right? Well, metabolizing fats and carbohydrates produce water, So you got to drink more water. Plus, you're making more water. Like if you got fat on your body and you're actually losing weight, you're producing more water inside your body. Your body is producing more water and you drinking more water. Of course you got to go to the bathroom. Of course you're going to the bathroom. And you flushing out toxins that was stored up in them fats and all. Of course you got to go to the potty. Yeah, you got to go to the potty. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to go to the potty. Right? Anyway. Oh, that's what I was getting ready to say. Oh, so the potential energy. And so when you go back to the basics, it's potential energy and kinetic energy. Right? So buried under the complexity of all these big words and terms, those things still exist. Potential energy, kinetic energy. So when you're looking at it's hard to conceptualize or hard to visualize the idea of something that's happening many times per second, right? As a storage space. Because storage, we think of no movement. You know what I'm saying? So when it's saying that the membrane potential or the proton gradient potential, like when they say this is a source of intermediate energy storage, you gotta just, you know what I'm saying? You gotta just roll with it. You know what I'm saying? But what they're talking about is the proton pools that's kind of always existing, right? So that's the other piece. That's the other piece that helped me figure out the Inky cycle, right? Going back to the Max Kleber thing, right? Because this is always going on. The Krebs cycle is always going on. And inside the mitochondria, right? Think of it like this, right? So in here, right? In here is where you have the electron transport chain. Then this is the matrix. Right? And in the matrix is only protons. In the matrix is only protons. This is what's going on in your mitochondria. In the matrix is only protons. So I realized early on that them structured water stories was like incomplete off the internet. You know what I'm saying? I realized it was incomplete because it was only talking about the fact of the electrons, right? But it was the protons. They had a job. Like think about it. Like the story never completed. When you watch them videos on structured water, they never gave you the rest of the story. Like, okay, the pools are the electrons and the electrons, you know, and the water is like a battery because the electrons and blah, 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 blah. What happened to the proton story, right? Mitochondria uses the protons. Yeah. So both aspects of the hydrogen atom is used, right? The protons, the structuring process that continues to happen in the water of your cells allows these matrices to build up just pools of protons, right? Period. Specifically in here. This is the main pool. This is the main pool. This is the main pool, right? This is the main pool, and protons leave here chasing electrons and wind up over here. And the reason why they go through the ATPase is not to make ATP. They don't care about you or your ATP. The protons go through here because this is set up as the only tunnel they can take to get back to their family. Yeah, they want to get back here. They want to get back here, right? There's only a handful of special protons that's going to wind up going here and get reunited again with electrons and turn into water, right? Only the protons that go here are going to get united with other electrons, turn back into hydrogen, and then the hydrogen is going to get married to some oxygen, and it's going to be a whole big family. Other than that, the family is just going to be like the friends, right in here, this pool of protons, right? So you have proton activity, which is just as important to your, that's where the conversation is coming from anyway. So storage, intermediary storage, potential, and all that. Remember, you have proton pools, and it's the electrons moving through here that make the protons go, action, gets the energy to start being produced, right? So, yeah, there's that part. Anyway, hopefully we're making some sense for you. Right? Hopefully we're making some sense. All right, so these transformations generate not only electrical potential. See, this is why we really need this water book. This is why we really need this water book. Yeah, we got to get this water book to go on. We got to get this water book to go on. We got to correct this crazy stuff. All right. These transformations generate not only an electrical potential, but also a proton gradient, and together they form the transmembrane potential of hydrogen ions. Right? Hydrogen ions are the electrons and protons of hydrogen once it's broken down. Available data indicate that signaling mechanisms driven by ATP and mitochondrial membrane potential are different. Normally, cells maintain stable levels of ATP and mitochondrial membrane potential. And this stability is thought to be a requisite for normal cell functioning. A requirement is what that means. Like, it has to happen or the cell goes crazy. It also suggests that although these parameters can change due to physiological activity, i.e. exercise, stress, changes in diet, these changes should be transient, meaning temporary changes in your life should only lead to temporary changes in energy production, right? When the change disappears, the energy production should go back to normal, right? But that's similar to the idea of chronic acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. The idea is that an interruption for whatever reason, whether you scraped your knee or got an infection or whatever, like an interruption that causes inflammation, when that interruption or that problem is gone, the inflammation that came with the problem should also disappear. The thing is, we now know that that doesn't always happen. So you have the term chronic inflammation, right? So similar, I'm assuming the article is getting ready to make similar statements or assumptions about disturbances in energy patterns, right? All right, blah, 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 blah. It also suggests that although these parameters can change due to physiological activity, these changes should be transient and that a prolonged perturbation of each factor may compromise the viability of the cells, leading to pathological. Okay, so that's exactly what I just said, right? Transient means like temporary or not long lasting, and perturbation is just something that disturbs the normal flow. And then pathological is disease forming, right? According to recent findings, mitochondria membrane potential can be used not only for ATP synthesis, but it is also a factor determining viability of mitochondria participating in a process of elimination of disabled mitochondria. It is also a driving force for transport of charged compounds, some of which are essential for mitochondrial viability. These non-energy producing functions are often treated superficially in literature, right? So they're critiquing Western academia themselves. So it is the purpose of this piece to discuss the other mechanisms which can play critical and even decisive roles in cell maintenance and viability. We will review the known roles of mitochondrial membrane potential and give recommendations on its accurate measurements in the cell. The significance of changes in mitochondrial membrane potential and ATP levels for cellular activity. What is the main basis of mitochondria quality control mechanisms? All right. We can pull a Charlie Brown teacher on this. Boom, bam, boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bam. Boom, bam, boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bam. Right? And we can kind of just highlight some stuff that we already discussed. Right? ADP, AMP. Right? ADP, AMP, right? So we know that the energy is coming from ATP. Only thing is, once it's used one time, it becomes ADP. And if it is channeled back in to be recycled again, it can go back to ATP. But if your body is using energy faster than you can recycle it, the ADP becomes AMP. AMP is the last stop. That is the last stop. There's only one energy containing molecule left, right? So you have a monitoring system, which we talked about a bunch, AMPK, right? AMPK is a kinase. That's a type of enzyme. That enzyme basically is monitoring this situation inside the cell. How much ATP you got as opposed to ADP and AMP, right? And then depending on what time of day it is, determines, like when it gets low and AMPK is at full blast, like ringing the alarm, depending on the time of the day, depends on where that alarm is, like where that alarm is sent. So if it's daytime, melanin stimulating, palm C, you're going to go that direction. If it's nighttime, melanin concentrating hormone, you're going to go that direction. Right. And then obviously there's variation, and we live indoors. So sometimes the signals are crossed and right? The signals go the wrong way. Sometimes we're getting too much signals. Sometimes we're getting false flags. Yeah, sometimes we're getting false flags. We get a lot of leptin false flags. And so it gets a little crazy, right? But the way the system is designed, right, is so that when you go through this process, which should be a normal process, this is not like a disease process. You're supposed to use up your energy, right? Especially if you're trying to lose weight or lose fat, right? Because one of the things that the AMPK is going to signal is, hey, it's time to dig in the stash. It's time to go into the reserve, which is the fat. And let's free up those fatty acids so we can get those fatty acids in the beta oxidation and out into the cell as fast as possible so we could get the AMP back to ADP and ATP so we can replenish our energy pool, right? Not to mention the fact that phosphocreatine is in the mix, right? Phosphocreatine is down here. Yeah, you got creatine in the mix. All of this is happening with creatine in the mix. Just want to throw that out there, right? As all of this is going on, creatine is down here at the base of your energy production system working with water. Believe it or not, creatine is working with water to at least produce a baseline of energy so that all of these things can continue to run, even when your energy is running out. So you got different types of gas tanks, right? You got different types of gas tanks to make sure that you never go to zero. If you go to zero, you're dead, right? So your body has a wide variety of systems to make sure you never go to zero. And that's where we kind of get differences in physiology and haplotypes and single nucleotide polymorphisms and white people this and black people that, right? Because of the way our bodies are designed, right? So if you notice, black people are not dominating like endurance sports. Black people are not dominating endurance sports. White people are dominating endurance sports. That's not necessarily a mistake. That's not like an accident, right? The way people who developed in colder climates, right? Their body design is better adapted at storing energy. And then partitioning and slowly utilizing that energy. Their haplotype and their single nucleotide polymorphisms, the mutations that have happened to them in the cold climate over time has better adapted their body to cold climate where food is scarce. So they've got to store energy and be able to pull it out. And so that's what endurance games are measuring. When you see these 100-mile races and 240-mile races, and those aren't measuring speed. So if you don't know what you're looking at and you watch one of those, or you look at somebody and they talking about that, you may not understand what they're talking about. Especially if you see clips and they're like, yeah, I was running, and you look, you're like, you ain't running, you're moving slow. It's like, that ain't running. Usain Bolt be running. You know what I'm saying? Sha'Carri Richardson be running. That ain't running. That's like speed walking at best. You know what I'm saying? But the sport is mental. It's a mental thing, and it's really about endurance. You know, it's this biochemistry, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that's one of the things that makes David Goggins kind of unique. But you can look at David Goggins and see that he's, you know, like he's mixed, you know what I'm saying? So he's kind of got a unique, his body is different, you know what I'm saying? He got that mix, white folks and black folks genetics, and you could see it when you look at him, you know what I'm saying? So that's how David Goggins is, you know, the Lone Ranger black guy out there doing a 200-mile. Like, what you doing over there, bro? You know what I'm saying? But he's in that space. And when you hear him tell his stories, you know what I'm saying? That's a part of what drove him as a child. You know what I'm saying? He was too black to hang out with the white kids and too white to hang out with the black kids. So he always felt like a loner, right? So that gave him the mentality of a loner to be able to motivate himself, because nobody else was going to be around to motivate him because he was alone all the time. You know what I'm saying? So he just turned those weaknesses into strengths, right? But primarily you don't see that, right? Just like primarily you don't see white guys dominating explosive sports, right? You know, you have your Tom Brady, but Tom Brady's in the quarterback position. The traditional quarterback doesn't have to move, which is one of the reasons why there's so much resistance to the black quarterback, because the black quarterback introduces a different style of quarterbacking, which has a lot more to do with mobility and being able to run than just kind of dropping back in the pocket and throwing the ball, right? So it's a different style of football. White athletes, like right now, I'm in transition, right? In basketball, I'm moving from LeBron as my favorite player to Luka. You know what I'm saying? Luka's been my second, you know, like that was my second favorite, you know, player since he came in the league, you know, since they did the whole Trey, you know, the trade for Trey, right? But with Joker and Luka coming into the league, their style of basketball is different, right? So playing in the Europe leagues, they have developed moves to go along with their body types. So if you notice, Joker and Luka both have moves where they're able to slow the game down. So they're not winning in basketball because like LeBron is going to outpower you, or, you know, like Derrick Rose would outrun you. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like Shea or Allen Iverson. These guys were too fast for you. You know, LeBron or Shaq, they're too powerful. You know, it's fast twitch muscle. It's all fast twitch muscle. That's not what they're doing. They're using their slow twitch muscle with new moves like Euro steps and things like that to make those weaknesses, what would have traditionally been a weakness, into a strength. You know what I'm saying? And but I've always been a fan of that style of basketball, right? I've always been a fan of that style of basketball. So there are differences in movement patterns. Those differences that we have amongst each other in movement patterns determines our differences in metabolism patterns, which determines our differences in energy patterns, right? Now, because energy is tied to movement, that can go the other direction. Differences in energy pattern can create differences in metabolism, which can create differences in movement. If we're letting the animal drive the machine instead of the mind, right? That's the difference between people and animals, is we have the mind, the free will, right? So we have the ability to let the body, like the autopilot, go and just be a prisoner of our patterns, or we can let the mind take over and we can create new patterns, right? Yeah, and then we have examples of people who overcome, you know, who change patterns, who do things that we didn't think were normal, who set new standards and things like that. They break the molds, right? All right. What else? What else? All right, so we got our AMP. Oh, here it goes right here. Our AMP kinase out the way. What else we got here? Membrane potential, negative inside the cell, and mitochondria such that driving force is preferred for inward transport of cations. Outward transport of anions. This property allows accumulation of cations of metal in the mitochondria exerted by intrinsic electrogenic transporters. Interesting. Intrinsic electrogenic transporters. Let's talk about it. All right. And depending on membrane potential as examples, we would like to point out the highly reviewed topic of calcium transport, and that much of the less discussed transport of iron from the cytosol to mitochondria is, calcium is a well-recognized regulator of mitochondrial respiration and intermediary metabolism. In its turn, the mitochondria membrane-driven inward mitochondria transport of iron, together with the mitochondrial iron sulfur clusters processing machinery, are required for the biogenesis of iron sulfur clusters, which are crucial cofactors for numerous proteins that play a central role in diverse processes, including electron transport chain, enzyme catalyst, cofactor biosynthesis, ribosome biogenesis, DNA replication, DNA repair, transcription, and translation. All right. Most of this centers around two things. So it sounds like a lot, but it's not. It centers around the electron transport chain and the NRF2 system, right? And then, pretty much that's the main stars of the show. When you get to iron and sulfur clusters, electron transport chain, NRF2 system. And then you have glutathione, and glutathione plays a huge role in the blood. Yeah, we may have to. Yeah. Now, I've talked about that in the past a bunch of times, right? Maybe it'll make more sense here because of where we are in terms of class. But that was a big part of Dr. Sebi's AIDS theory, right? A big part of Dr. Sebi's AIDS theory, rested on, so there's a few pieces, right? Piece number one, right? And this is where I was able to peek behind the curtain and realize Dr. Sebi was, I ain't gonna say frauding a little bit, but he had taken, I guess, some of his beef maybe with Elijah Muhammad over time has softened. Because initially Dr. Sebi was Nation of Islam. And what drove him away from Nation of Islam is because he knew that Elijah Muhammad had a lot more science in terms of eating in the body and disease than he was given to the people. And Elijah Muhammad explained to Dr. Sebi that, you know, like, our people are lazy. We don't like studying. We don't like changing habits. So if I drop too much info on the people, they're going to run away from everything, as opposed to if I give them incremental pieces of information, it'll be easier for them to implement it in their life and make long lasting changes. Right. And so, you know, Sebi had other ideas and Wynn did his own thing. But eventually, you know, where Sebi was talk crazy about reading books and blah, blah, blah. There are certain things that Dr. Sebi was teaching that I realized you could only get from books. You didn't get this from no Mexican champ. You didn't learn alkaline and base from a Mexican in the woods. That's out of a scientific book. You didn't learn hemolytic anemia from a Mexican in the woods, right? Because when Dr. Sebi was talking about anemia, most people thought that he was talking about like when your iron get low and your feet get cold, blah, blah, blah. That's a type of anemia. That's like a very non-specific. It wasn't until I was digging deeper into his concept of the whole AIDS thing that I realized he wasn't talking about that at all. He was talking about a form of anemia called hemolytic anemia. Because when you have hemolytic anemia, your cell breaks down and degrades. And the debris from the cell breaking down can cause a PCR test to give you a false positive for anything, whatever you're looking for. It can cause you to get a false positive, right? So there was that part built into his conversation around AIDS. But then there was also a part of glutathione, getting back to the iron and the sulfur aspect, the glutathione levels, right? So low glutathione is the primary driver of hemolytic anemia, right? So you got to get the body's glutathione levels up. Now, for me, because he never mentioned this, so I don't know if he knew. Maybe he just didn't go that far with the info or not. I don't know if he cared to know or whatever, but I needed to know the mechanism, like why that was happening. So, you know, I'm trying to fill in these holes in information. And so eventually, you know, I figure out, oh, makes sense. Red blood cells don't have the same machinery as other cells. Red blood cells don't have mitochondria and nucleus, and like red blood cells don't have that stuff. So when we're talking about the anatomy of a cell, and the cell has a nucleus, and the nucleus has the DNA, and then you have mitochondria floating around in the cytoplasm of the cell, and you know the cell is made out of structured water gel and blah blah blah. We're not that does not apply to red blood cells. Period. That none of that applies to red blood cells at all. Red blood cell is pigment. It's a pigment disc. It's a toroid. You know, it's like a frozen, it's like a solid vortex. Yeah, made out of pigment. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's totally different. It's totally different. So it requires that glutathione in the blood to maintain its, you know, like viability, integrity, you know, its structure. You know what I'm saying? Like the blood depends on the glutathione. And so across the board, people that have blood issues or metabolic issues have low glutathione levels. And that translates into disease problems also, because with low glutathione, your NRF2 system suffers. That's why I'd be telling everybody, listen, don't get confused and think like
what we have is a detox for poop. Our monthly detox kit is set up for the NRF2 system and glutathione levels, right? NRF2, glutathione, and then to a lesser extent, but not less in importance, just less focus, stem cells, right? That's what our monthly detox is built around. Helping your body boost stem cells, boost glutathione, boost NRF2 system, right? And that's why you need to take it every month. So like, yo, I had the Kimmy. When's the last time you had it? When's the last time you had it? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just designed to take monthly, right? Every 3-4 months, you have all new blood. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to stay on this. You know what I'm saying? You got to stay on this because it's a day-to-day thing. But yeah, so that was tied to that. That was tied to that. And his concept was that anal sex creates rips in the hole of the colon and the anus that allows feces and bacteria into the blood circulation. And when you get feces and bacteria in the blood circulation, the glutathione levels drop dramatically. So even when scientists ran nutritional protocols on AIDS patients that they had, the ones that were successful, they were based around restoring glutathione levels. So, okay, there's that. Yeah. It could, because, but see, that's the thing. He had mentioned some stuff, and we had just let it flow by. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I was a Navy sailor, and blah blah. Wait, whoa. You was in where? You was doing what? Nah, bro. You had to learn certain things. You had to learn certain things in order to be in certain spaces. So what happened is, similar to my life, Dr. Sebi had a charmed, he had a lot of things that put him in a lot of places. And in those places, he learned things that at the time seemed random, right? It just was, knowledge for whatever he needed, for whatever was in front of him. At the time, you can't know that what you're going through is preparing you for something else. So later on, when he goes through his health crisis, and he goes through his experience, and he gets help from somebody that doesn't have the science. They just know about plants and, herbs and, from being Nation of Islam member and getting a certain amount of, first of all, you cannot be a Nation of Islam member without reading a lot. That's a part of becoming a Nation of Islam member. You're gonna be reading and studying. You're gonna have to memorize. Like, so there's a reading culture built into Nation of Islam. That there's 1,000 things that we could say are wrong with Nation of Islam, but that's one thing that was positive and still is positive. I'm not sure if they still press the issue with the reading thing. You know what I'm saying? But that back in the days, that was a solid thing. That's how Dr. York was able to be wolf in sheep's clothing for so long before they find out what he was really up to, is because he was promoting reading, where, inner cities, always illiteracy is promoted to us. And anybody that's promoting dropping out of school or not learning, those people are always elevated as local heroes, right? Kanye doesn't blow up until he does College Dropout, right? When Kanye does College Dropout, boom, the powers that be elevate him into an icon. You know what I'm saying? So that's always a concept that's promoted to our babies, is illiterate success. Illiterate success. Because if you could somehow make money while remaining being illiterate, you become food for bigger fish. You become food for bigger fish. You don't become a source of freedom for your people. You become food for bigger fish, right? If you become successful and you're a self-contained unit, if you become financially successful and you're a self-contained unit, you become a source of freedom for your people behind you. But if you're ignorant, illiterate, innumerate, and you become financially successful, you become food for larger fish, right? So now you become a bleep on the radar, and then the lawyers and the accountants and all of those people come around you. And by the time they disperse from around you, they done separated you from all your cash. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like Fordham Road used to be back in the days in the Bronx. Oh my goodness. Woo! You go to Fordham Road, you got a few dollars in your pocket, you young. Oh my God. Them dudes playing the 3-card, you know what I'm saying? Like somebody gonna come up to you and tell you, man, yo, I just stole this gold chain. You know, listen, this gold chain costs $700 in the store, man. Listen, give me $75 right now, man. You get this gold chain. By the time you leave Fordham Road, you ain't got no school clothes. You ain't got no school clothes. You'd have been swindled out of half your money. The other half your money, you done bought a chain that's going to turn green on your neck in 2 days. And you know your mama going to whoop you. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So, yeah. I ain't even gonna put your comment on the screen, but yeah, them folks, they part of that foolish, you know, they part of that foolishness. But so that's how that goes. You know what I'm saying? That's how that goes. That's why, you know, basketball players and athletes and you know, singers and you know, people that get a lot of money, they get turned into food for the larger players. And guess what's funny? The people that the ignorant, illiterate, and innumerate, financially blessed people become food for are the people who went to school. The people who learned how to read and count. Think about that. It's always the athlete or the singer, the rapper. It's always the person who made their fortune with their physical gifts that winds up broke and says, the record label ripped me off, or the record label execs, all them went to school. The accountants ripped me off. All them went to school. The lawyers ripped me off. The lawyers went to school. So you have to think about this. It's business. It's business to keep you functionally illiterate. That's the same thing as health and fitness, right? Functionally illiterate, functionally innumerate, meaning you can read and count and you learn your particular thing, right? So you learn basketball, you learn enough because you got to read the playbooks and you got to be, you know, you got to be smart in that to be, but you're not going to, you know, you're not going to really let you develop your brain because then you're going to be all over the place. And that's not how that go. We just want to advertise on TV that you're making $100 million. Yeah, we want to put on TV that you're making $100 million. You know what I'm saying? So that way young people are inspired to do the same thing you're doing. But what they don't know is that when you make that 100 million, you're making millionaires out of the people that went to school. So when you go as a basketball player, you make the $400 million contract. The people that went to school to learn how to be, maybe they went to medical school, but they couldn't finish school. So they just got their, physical education degree, or the people who went for business accounting, the lawyers, the you're going to make, those are the people that you're going to make long-term wealth. You're going to make them long-term wealth, even if you only have wealth for 5 or 10 years and then you broke again, because they're going to be getting millions of dollars from 20 different Kobe's, 100 different Kobe's. Yeah, it's just a new Kobe every draft. We got a new Jaylen Brown, Shea. They coming through. Yeah, it's always going to be a few more. You're going to get these millions too, and then we're going to separate them from these millions. You know what I'm saying? But we're not going to advertise the lawyers, the accountants, to this one, to that one, So there's always a play on keeping the illiterate, the ignorant masses ignorant. And then even if they do get some success, we'll put some folks in place to separate them from that short-term success. And the people that separate them from that short-term success will have the long-term success, right? Because those would be the people who went to school, right? And how does that play a role in our whole conversation about hospitals, or medical schools rather, coming along in 1765 before they had any knowledge of anything else? Because guess what they had knowledge of in 1765? In 1765, the medical schools did not have an understanding of the human body. But what they did have an understanding of was banking. Banking. So why did a degree from a certain school get respect? Why did it get credibility? Why do today people respect credential more than information? A, because credential can be presented quicker. Information has to be proved. Like if you don't have a credential, but you say you know something, I got to watch you, see you do something with it, or I got to read some of your material, or I have to experience what you got going on in order to be able to say, oh, okay, no, that's official. If you present me a credential, I could just look at the credential real quick and go, oh yeah, no, that's official. So that's number one. We're lazy. So credential is like microwaved experience. When I see the credential, I assume you got XYZ that goes along with credential. The second thing, which is more important than the first thing, is that the money. People with a certain credential make a certain type of money. And because people respect the money, they respect the credential, because the credential allows you to print that money. So there's a lifestyle that goes with a credential. So that if we close our eyes and we think of banker, there's a certain lifestyle and picture that we think of with a banker. Stockbroker, right? There's a certain lifestyle that goes with that. Doctor, there's a certain lifestyle that goes with doctor. So sometimes if you say you're a doctor and somebody says you're not no doctor, they're not even basing that on your knowledge. They're basing that on what their idea looks like of a doctor. Doctor is Ferrari. Doctor is big house. Doctor is money. Doctor is Rolex. You ain't got none of that. You can't be a doctor. You're not a doctor. Doctor where? That's the doctor where? Where you a doctor at? Right? And then the next thing is, where's your credential? What school you came? Because if you got a credential from here, you should be working here. And that means you should have Ferrari, house, Rolex, right? So it's money. It's money, but not in the way that people think. That's where the problem comes in. Because we think that, because it's more money in keeping people sick, the healthcare system does this, and that. That ain't how it went. right? Big pharma is OJ. If the glove don't fit, quit. If the glove don't fit, we must acquit. Big pharma is innocent of the charges. Big pharma is not innocent, but they're innocent of the charges. Yeah, they're not the mastermind of this class action RICO we've been putting against Big Pharma the last 30 years. It's not Big Pharma. They're not the head of the snake. Big Pharma is the guy in the crime organization that you see the show and they always get that one guy and then they lean on him and force him to snitch on the real boss. That's who Big Pharma is. Big Pharma is not the real boss. Big Pharma is the guy that you lean on, and then you got to get Big Pharma to snitch on the real boss. Big Pharma is not the real boss. The real boss is, I can't even say the church, but the church started it. The church was the boss, and then at some point, the underboss became the boss. Yeah. John Gotti was the church, and then like Sammy the Bull was like academia. At some point, Sammy took, the underboss took over, and now it's academia. Yeah, academia is the boss now, the boss of all bosses. That's who the vitriol should be directed at. You know what I'm saying? That we direct at Big Pharma. That's why nothing changes, because we think Big Pharma is the problem. Big Pharma is not the problem. It's academia. All right. So 1765, they don't know anything about the body, but they have medical schools. How does that work? How does that last? Because it's not about saving people or preventing disease. It's about the people that have this credential being able to live a certain lifestyle. And that is proven to work. That is proven to work. Yeah. So you have a steady stream of people that want to live a certain lifestyle, go and get the degree. And when they get the degree, they live the lifestyle. So that system works. So even over the years, as they made major discoveries, which should have destroyed or at least been paradigm shifts for the academic society, it wasn't, because none of those discoveries changed the money making, right? When they discovered calories, that didn't change the money making of the medical system. That just created a new lane of money making for calorie people, right? Later on, when they discover vitamins and nutrients, that doesn't change the money making of the medical system. It just opens up a new avenue. So they continue their flawed system of health, but perfect system of money making, while other systems open up alongside it. And so what John Q. Public today has to understand, and this is why I've been steady promoting knowledge first, information before anything else. But number two, I've been consistent with saying wealthy people are not making the choice of people in poverty when it comes to health. What people in poverty and health do, or people that struggling, month to month, check to check, they're choosing something and they're engaging in this daily debate. Holistic, medical, shot, plants, exercise, this, that, like one or the other, plant-based, carnivore. Like wealthy people aren't doing that. Wealthy people are old school with it. It's just, let me review all my options and let me choose from the best of all my options, right? Now, because you don't have the ability to afford to hire 15 professionals to manage your decisions every day, you have to learn your body, which is where the whole physician heal thyself comes from. If you learn your body, then you can play the role of all those people. Right? You can be your nutritionist, which then becomes dietitian, right? You learn the nutrients, then you know the diet to put together for whatever your goal is, right? And you know how to couple that with movement patterns. So now you're your trainer, right? When illness happens, you have an understanding of how the metabolism works, and how the metabolism is related to the tissues. So now you're able to modify movement and diet to change tissue behavior, right? And you know, so hopefully this is all making sense, right? Hopefully this is all making sense, right? So we understand the importance, right? Because I don't want people just to see fancy stuff on the cover, like, oh, look at that. Inky is getting deep. Look at that triangle and the pitchfork with the letter M. That's what people call it. You know what I'm saying? The triangle with the pitchfork. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, that's that science right there. He getting deep over there. That's that science right there. No. The understanding behind those symbols is science, not just looking at the symbols and being like, oh, look at that. You know what I'm saying? If you don't have the science of it, then it's nothing. It's just an empty symbol. Like people running around wearing ankhs. You don't know what an ankh means. You don't know Kemetic science. Most of these Kemetic, Egyptologists masquerading as Kemetic scholars, they don't know what that means. They listening to Brother Reggie and foolish, like Reggie don't know what he's talking about. You know what I'm saying? So people, the ankh doesn't have an understanding if you don't know, you know, you're just wearing it because it's a nice shape. And you might like on a surface level that it represents an alternative to the Greco-Roman colonization via the cross. You know what I'm saying? But you don't understand what the cross means if you symbolize Greco-Roman colonization with the cross. You know what I'm saying? Because that's not what that means. Right? But yeah, I don't want the scientific equations like you when you're out there, because remember the goal is for you to be teaching this science to your people, bringing them to the books, bringing them back to the videos, the classes, and the lessons. You have to share the truth. If you're absorbing the truth and you're not sharing the truth, you are stealing. You are stealing, and not from me. You already paid me because you bought the book. You made the super chat. You joined the paid Patreon. You sent in the Cash App or Zelle, or you went to the website and got some herbs. So you already exchanging with me. But you got to pay the big boss. You got to pay the, you got to pay the big boss off for positioning you. You know what I'm saying? In front of information to have the ability to make the exchange. Because some people don't know we exist. Some people don't know this information exists. 9.9 out of 10 people are running around asking why. Why does metabolic disease exist in America the way it does? Because metabolic disease is the reason why we have the sickest country in the world. It's metabolic disease that's suppressing our health. Which is crazy because metabolic disease is changeable. If it was genetic disease, like inherited disease, you kind of got one hand tied behind your back with that. That's a way tougher fight. But metabolic disease, that's people just not knowing any better or not being willing to change. But when you look at the numbers, the fact that we spend the most money on gym memberships and supplements, that tells you everybody's willing to change. Everybody's willing to change. It's just there's so much misinformation out there. They don't know who to trust, right? And so because they don't know who to trust, they don't know what to do really, but follow the masses. But the masses are the asses. People are dumbest when they're in herds, right? So you have to be blessed and honored that you're at a position to get this info. That's why I always feel blessed and honored to share it, because I feel blessed and honored to get it. Blessed and honored to share it. Blessed and honored that you people have put me in a position to be able to do this. This from is like intermediary. You know what I'm saying? But that responsibility translates to you. You got to be the one, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's why I set up tutoring instead of consultations. You know what I'm saying? I'll do consultations with people, but it's really for tutoring. I want to help you learn, because any consultations you should be handling. Somebody going through something that you should be handling. And if you can't handle it, the first realization you need to make is that you were slipping with your studies. Yeah, because we got the books, we got the classes. What you doing? What you doing? Yeah. And that's how I feel. That's what inspires me to keep going. When I find out stuff that's going on or something challenges my mind, I'm like, oh, I got to get back to work. Sometimes I might even be in the middle of talking to y'all and stop mid-sentence, like, that's what I've been looking for. Then I got to write that down. So by the time I finish the video, I don't forget that. And I could go back to that later and be like, oh, yes. Okay, now go look up this. Go get this book and that book, because, yeah, you're going to need to put this. Who's that guy? Let me go get his whole book. And yeah, you got to know what these guys, you got to know these guys and what they're talking about. So this is what we on, family. This is what we on, family. And then we're going to start up another class. The next class is going to start up. And, we're going to go from the bottom where the science should have started from. Started from the bottom, now we're here. We're going to do it that way. We're going to do it the right way. Right? So what medical school should have started off with, which is water, we're going to start off with water. So our next class, which we might run like before we finish week 15, class 3, and get into our final for this class, we may have another class that we may start running. We may start running that class, the biochemistry, based on water. You know what I'm saying? We may start running that class. So you definitely want to look out for your book. You definitely want to look out for the first book. The first book, let me just give y'all a little sneak peek what that's going to look like. Yeah, that's what the first book cover is going to look like. So that's dropping. That's dropping. That's happening. And that right there is going to hit the earth like how Nas said. That's going to hit the earth like a comet invasion. Inky's like an Afrocentric Asian, half man, half amazing. Yeah, that book right there is going to hit the earth like a comet invasion. Yeah. So that book is going to hit the earth like a comet invasion.
This is why you have to go to Amazon and get the book, Rich Abs, Poor Abs, now.